The investigation into alleged links between Donald Trump's election campaign and Russia has taken a dramatic turn, with the news that his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and Rick Gates have been indicted by a federal grand jury.
It says that they were paid by the Ukrainian government, but that they hid these payments from U.S. authorities.
He was seeking to further democracy and to help the Ukraine come closer to the United States.
He's a respected man.
The technical term for what we do is lobbying.
Conspiracy to launder money, unregistered agent of a foreign principal.
For purposes of today, I will admit that in a narrow sense, some people might term it influence peddling.
When Donald Trump announced he was running for president, he took direct aim at the ways of Washington.
I've watched the politicians. I've dealt with them all my life. They're controlled fully by the lobbyists, by the donors, and by the special interests. It's destroying our country.
But with the Republican nomination in sight, he turned to a longtime D.C. insider, a man who had turned political influence into an industry.
You'd be surprised who's been calling me over the last week and where they're from. And do I know the 25, 30-year-old delegates? No. Do I know the people who push buttons in a lot of these states? Yes. But that's not even the point. There's a lot of residual support for Donald Trump out there.
I'm with you, the American people.
We've been involved over...
Paul Manafort was an old hand at delegate wrangling, but he'd been out of the game for a long time.
We think you saw the coming together of the Republican Party.
This is a guy who's been overseas consulting for decades. And suddenly, he's back out of the wilderness into the center of U.S. politics.
His last job in Ukraine had ended in chaos. The country was rocked by revolution. His client, Viktor Yanukovych, was forced into exile. Manafort had managed to land on his feet, but when the secrets of his years in Kiev caught up with him, his fall was sudden and complete.
We are following some breaking news from the Trump campaign. Chairman Paul Manafort has resigned.
Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort today pleading not guilty after that 12-count indictment.
Paul Manafort spent a lifetime expertly navigating the murky world of foreign consulting. But after his work in Ukraine, he could spend the rest of his life in prison.
What do you think might have attracted him to a place like Ukraine?
Exciting campaigns, good fees. Paul likes a challenge and he likes to be creative. Did he cross an ethical line at some point? I don't know.
Long before he was a kingmaker in Ukraine, Paul Manafort was a power broker in Washington. He built up influence as an advisor to Republican presidential candidates. And in the 1980s, he found new markets for his influence overseas as a partner at Black, Manafort, and Stone.
One of the things this firm pioneered was mixing traditional political consulting in the U.S. with lobbying for foreign leaders, sometimes odious foreign leaders.
Paul had a sense of adventure and he liked the excitement of campaigns, and he enjoyed the overseas work and learning new countries and new people and that sort of thing.
Manafort represented dictators in Zaire and in the Philippines and lobbied to arm a warlord in Angola.
Our meeting with the president went very well.
With his help, strongmen solidified their rule and won the backing of the White House.
One of our most valued friends.
These guys built fortunes doing this. And in the course of doing that, they became a model that helped build the Washington lobbying economy.
Black, Manafort, Stone & Kelly is a lobbying and public relations firm.
We were making six figures, and we got ourselves company cars. And so Paul got a Mercedes, but he liked to impress people.
Paul Manafort had a series of incredibly lucrative contracts overseas. Yet he was occasionally short of cash, it appears. And this led him to some unusual arrangements sometimes, and it eventually led him to Kiev.
In 2005, Manafort traveled to Ukraine and began working for its wealthiest man, Rinat Akhmetov. Akhmetov and his fellow oligarchs had a problem. A popular uprising had swept the country, and their party was out of power. Manafort and his associate Rick Gates were hired to rebuild the party and salvage the career of former Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych.
Manafort came to see me, and he said, look, Yanukovych's people reached out to me. They want to win an election. I said, I'll teach them how to win an election the old-fashioned democratic way. And I said, that's fine with me.
But in a cable he sent to Washington at the time, later published by WikiLeaks, Ambassador Herbst was less diplomatic about Manafort's new clients, writing, ex-PM Yanukovych's Party of Regions is working to change its image from that of a haven for mobsters into that of a legitimate political party. Manafort was used to dealing with rough characters, but Yanukovych presented a unique challenge.
Розумієте, Янукович був представник тієї частини України, яка не вміла посміхатися. І це дуже характерна риса. Це шахтарі, це люди, які тяжко працюють, це суворі люди.
Manafort built his team and set to work on his client's public image.
Якщо подивитися на Януковича 2004 року і на Януковича 2010 року, це були абсолютно дві різні людини. Я ж то йшла поряд, і я знаю і бачила це. Це була блискуча робота технолога, зішліфування людини, починаючи від його манер. Пол зробив з нього іншу людину.
Manafort also had a political strategy. He brought better polling techniques and targeted messaging.
He had very clear message for different audience, depending on the region and religion as well. Because for one part of country he produced one messages, for other completely different.
In many ways, Ukraine was two countries in one. There was the eastern Russian-speaking half that tilted toward Moscow, and the western half that tilted toward Europe. Manafort sold Yanukovych as the man who could unite the country.
Пол національну ідею для України, європейську інтеграцію. Він знав і розумів, що жити краще хочуть люди і на Заході, і на Сході. І він дав їм цю стратегію.
But others say he also exploited cultural divisions over language and faith.
Эти черные годы для нашей страны.
The strategy of Manafort was to find the most painful topics. It's very similar with the strategy of Manafort in America for Trump.
Президент України Віктор Янукович.
In 2010, Yanukovych was elected president. His political comeback was complete. Manafort may have believed that Ukraine's future was with the West, but when it came to his own interests, he looked to Russia.
Paul Manafort is not just a political player in the Ukraine, in the region, he's also a financial force and does financial deals with some of the most powerful oligarchs in the region, including Oleg Deripaska.
Oleg Deripaska, an aluminum magnate, is thought to have close ties with Vladimir Putin.
Deripaska and Paul Manafort form an investment firm together. It's based in the Cayman Islands. It's called Pericles. Deripaska puts in millions of dollars in hopes of a good return. This was one of the first examples of Paul Manafort using offshore accounts that we found. It's a practice that would later get him in trouble.
If Manafort was to maintain his influence and keep making deals, he needed his main client to stay in power. But in 2011, Yanukovych overreached. His political rival, Yulia Tymoshenko, was arrested, sparking turmoil at home and condemnation abroad.
Він повірив, що він в Україні вже такий великий господар, що все він може, так? Він не знав, наскільки світ може зруйнувати людину і возвисити людину.
The European Union, the United States all observed this trial and concluded, as I did, that it was a political trial.
To contain the crisis, Manafort turned to Skadden Arps, one of the world's most powerful corporate law firms. And in 2012, it issued a report on the Tymoshenko case, finding insufficient evidence that she was denied due process. The report would come at a heavy cost for all involved.
The indictment of Paul Manafort and Rick Gates makes reference to millions of dollars in secret payments that were made to pay for a report that supported the reputation of the Yanukovych regime. The payments for this report and other materials went through offshore accounts, and it is this offshore laundering of funds that has the attention of the special counsel.
An attorney for Skadden, Alex van der Zwaan, pled guilty to lying to investigators when they questioned him about the report.
I have a feeling that Skadden probably wishes they never touched anything related to Ukraine.
And for Yanukovych, the report came too late. In Western capitals, the damage to his reputation had already been done. As Yanukovych moved away from the EU and closer to Russia, Ukraine came unraveled. In 2014, anti-government protests paralyzed Kiev. The standoff came to a head in February when police opened fire on demonstrators. Yanukovych fled to Russia. Yulia Tymoshenko was released from prison. The revolution was over, but the reckoning had just begun.
There was a fire in headquarters of Party of Region. During this fire, some people died, and somebody came inside the office and took this documentation. A payment for political consulting from Yanukovych to Manafort, according to Black Ledger.
The documents came to be known as the Black Ledger, appearing to show under-the-table payments made by the Yanukovych government between 2007 and 2012. Among the 20,000 line items were $12.7 million in alleged payouts to Manafort.
You can find payment like $2-3 million payment for loyalty of TV station during election. You can find payment $1 million for judges as a bribery, for members of parliament as a bribery, for electoral commission bribery. And Mr. Manafort appeared in this book about 22 times.
Manafort contends the documents were forged and he never received the payments listed in the ledger. Yanukovych denies all allegations of corruption. It would take more than 2 years for the ledger to come to light, time enough for Manafort to take on one last client.
Oh, wow. Wow, wow, wow. So beautiful.
Back in the U.S., with legal and financial troubles mounting, Manafort saw an opportunity.
Not only has Paul Manafort lost his primary source of income from the Ukraine, but he's also being sued by Oleg Deripaska. This is presenting something of a funding crisis for Paul Manafort. He needs to find a source of cash to pay his bills, and he needs to find it fast.
In the spring of 2016, he joined the Trump campaign as an unpaid consultant.
It may seem strange that Paul Manafort is offering his services to the Trump campaign for free, but Manafort understood that influence is its own form of currency.
He knew Donald and he knew the people around Trump, and when they were in a crisis and needed somebody to help manage the convention, Paul was the best in the world.
Is this Donald Trump's convention or the Republican convention?
Well, it's both, but this is clearly going to be Donald Trump's convention.
Paul Manafort's stock rises quickly within the tumultuous world of the Trump campaign. And after a few months, he's campaign chair. He's running the show.
Trump 70, Clinton 30.
Those who had worked with Manafort in Ukraine knew Trump had hired the best, but they also sensed that the walls might be closing in on him.
І коли я побачила його Трампа, я сказала, Трамп виграє президентські вибори. І коли я бачила, що він вже з Іванкою і з цим Кушнером в обнімку виходить біля трибуни, біля Трампа стає, я думала, Пол, тобі кінець.
So to be clear, Mr. Trump has no financial relationships with any Russian oligarchs.
That's what he said. That's what I said. That's obviously what our position is.
After the revelations about Manafort's work in Ukraine, he was cut loose from the Trump campaign.
Paul Manafort, a senior member of a presidential campaign team accused of conspiracy against the United States.
In October 2017, Manafort was among the first to be charged in Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the U.S. election. In the indictment, Manafort is accused of failing to register as a foreign agent for Ukraine.
The Foreign Agents Registration Act has its origins in the years before World War II, when the U.S. government decided it was imperative to require agents representing the interests of the Nazi regime to register with their activities with the U.S. government.
Leader of the German-American Bund, hiding behind the American flag.
The law is only enforced haphazardly since, even as there's been an explosion in Washington in the representation of foreign interests. Now, with the book being thrown at Paul Manafort, K Street is nervous.
But the most damaging charges against Manafort and his associate Rick Gates are financial in nature. According to the indictment, they earned tens of millions of dollars for their work in Ukraine. They funneled it through offshore accounts, evaded taxes, and used it to buy high-end real estate and luxury cars.
You know, Paul Manafort worked for me for a very short period of time. He worked for Ronald Reagan, he worked for Bob Dole, he worked for John.
The president has been quick to distance himself from his former campaign chairman. But Manafort's years in Ukraine may still hold the key to the central mystery of the Mueller probe.
As investigators look at the question of whether there was collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, it makes sense that they would focus on Paul Manafort, the chairman of that campaign, who also has ties to oligarchs and politicians friendly to the Kremlin.
Rick Gates has already cut a deal with Mueller. But Manafort has pled not guilty on all counts and has been awaiting his day in court.
Paul Manafort is in his late 60s. If he is found guilty of the many charges brought against him, absent a pardon or a deal with prosecutors, he'll be spending the rest of his life in a federal prison.
I think it's taking a toll on him. I pray that he's innocent, but I don't know. But only he knows what he did.